restoration. It's about nutrition and restorative sleep and their linkage to mental well-being. And so I would like to start off by introducing our tonight's speakers as well as myself. I am Miguel Gonzalez, a project coordinator at the Grand Rapids African American Health Institute. We also have our panelists who I will ask if they could just introduce themselves. And so whoever would like to go first, go ahead.
Can you hear me? I'm Dr. Tim Daum.
Yeah, we can hear you just great.
And can you see me? I can't tell. I can't see my video, so I can't tell if you can see me or not.
We can.
All right, great. Well, I'm Dr. Timothy Daum, and I'm director of the Sleep Lab at U of M Health West. And I'm here to talk about sleep issues.
Thank you.
I'm Dr. Jenny Bush. I'm a pediatrician at Cherry Health, and I'm here to give just the general pediatric opinions on all of these topics.
Hi, I'm Dr. Shiade. I'm a pediatric neurologist here in Grand Rapids, and I'll probably just be supporting the two main speakers. I'm giving the neurology perspective in general on sleep issues.
All right, great. Well, thank you all again. Just a reminder, out of respect for the speakers, if you could keep your mics muted, and if you have any questions, please share them in the chat, and any other questions we'll try to get to at the end. So thank you for that. So restoration. So in 2020, GRAHI, the Grand Rapids African American Health Institute, they released an updated report on their annual health equity report, which kind of stated that roughly 13% of adults in the King County area reported having poor mental health issues lasting of 2 weeks or longer. And so this data is quite interesting. One, because it doesn't include, it hasn't yet included, youth, our kids, which we look to collect that data on in the Grand Rapids public school system. And it doesn't include people who reported having poor mental health and wellness for shorter periods of 2 weeks. So people who may have it frequently or every other day instead of a consistent basis for 2 weeks. And so that's why we're kind of here to talk about this, because I believe that this is something that we can all relate to and learn from, especially given what we've just recently experienced with the COVID pandemic over the last 2 years. And so to touch on that, so I'll just kind of start off this conversation with a little opener. So I'll assume like we all get rest within like a 27-hour period, which is just slightly more than a day. And so we all get sleep, we all get rest, we all go through some form of complex or simple decision making, whether it's at work, school, or just our daily lives with our families. But how much of that time do we actually spend acknowledging how our bodies feel, the responses to what we put and supply for our bodies, whether it be nutrition, sleep, or just overall attention to our mental well-being. And so that's what we're here for, and I'm gonna kind of jump into it. So by starting off with mental wellness. So what we've kind of discovered is that there's like a couple different components to mental wellness, and so I'll just break those down, and then I'll kind of have our speakers kind of talk on that, and we can hear about their opinions. So the 7 key components that kind of found through different studies and research are the first one being sense of self, which is kind of like someone's like confidence in themselves, how they view themselves. There's cognitive health, which relates to how people are able to confidently navigate decisions. There's emotional health, being able to stay consistent with your views and your values, and having control over your emotions. There's physical health, which relates to how you physically feel. The fifth one would be kindness, is how you're able to help navigate different relationships that you have with people, your willingness to support those around you. We have nutrition, which kind of talks about how well you are based on what you supply, the nutrients that you supply to your body. The nutrients you supply really are important for your energy and also just development. And then the last one is emotional health. And so being able to be consistent with your aims, your values, being able to apply different coping skills throughout your daily life. And so my question for our speakers tonight is, what do you all know about mental wellness in the various communities that you work with? If you could share a little bit, do you all have an opinion on that?
Well, I can certainly start working in a.
One thing that I'll say is for.
Go ahead, Jenny.
Sorry about that. I think we might have a little delay. I was going to say that I see a lot of teenagers with issues with anxiety, depression, maybe anger outbursts that maybe weren't typical for their personality all of their lives. And a lot of times when I dig down into what's going on, quite often it is related to sleep. I would say that's one of the biggest impacts on those sudden behavior changes. I always try to kind of remind people that we've all as adults had days where we stayed up all night long or way later than we should. And how do you feel that next day? You usually feel like you just kind of want to lay around. You don't want to do a lot of deep thinking. You don't want to do a lot of activity. People who might annoy you a little bit every day kind of annoy you a lot when you're feeling exhausted. And so for these kids that every night they're maybe up until midnight, 2 o'clock playing video games, they're kind of going through their life feeling that way every day. So we got to fix the sleep problems before we can really do a good job with their mental health.
And this is Dr. Tim Daum. I would echo what Dr. Bush just said. Working in a sleep disorder center or a sleep clinic, seeing people who have poor sleep, it clearly impacts their mental health, and it touches on so many of those 7 components of emotional health that you brought up. If you're not sleeping well, you don't have the capacity or the bandwidth to deal with those aspects of mental health.
Yeah, thank you all. And so, yeah, I really agree and love you all's responses. And so, we'll kind of transition to how our nutrition kind of impacts our mental wellness. So, I'm going to start off with the first question, and simply being, so nutrition is our main source of energy. It can be a big determinant on how we physically feel, but can it also be a determinant in our mood and our mental functionality as well?
I'll say, yes, of course it's going to impact us as well. Examples I can think of for that, we all know little kids, if they get a little too much sugar, they'll be too hyper for a while and they'll be crashed and really irritable later. So that's probably the clearest example I could give where everyone should kind of be able to relate to that a little bit. But just our everyday nutrition too, if we're giving our body a lot of junk, it's going to feel kind of junky and that affects our moods and our ability to think well and have patience and as well. Thinking can be really important for for thought processes and deeper thinking as well.
You broke up a little bit, but I did hear you mention about like the junky foods. So a question about that, like, is it ever like too much sweets that we should like give our kids, or is there like an issue with artificial sweeteners? I guess that's kind of two different questions, but can you just talk a little bit about sweets if you're able to, about different sugars and things like that? Is that safe for kids to have as far as
So I think most things in moderation are okay. I don't want to say all things, because obviously there's things we definitely shouldn't give our kids, but some sugar in moderation should be fine. I always encourage my families to try not to let it be a daily thing that we'd eat a lot of processed foods or sugary foods, that maybe it's a once in a while kind of food, maybe once or twice a week to have a little bit of a special sugary treat would be okay. It's when we're doing it, when it's our main foods, when it's every day that we're eating those foods, that I think it starts to affect us a little bit more. For the artificial sweeteners, I've never seen any strong proof that they're as bad for us as some people claim that they are. But the artificial sweeteners usually come in the foods that just aren't good for us in the first place. So there's no good nutrition in them. So they're not going to help us to live well. That would be my opinion on that one. And I know there are plenty of people who disagree. There are plenty of people who insist that artificial sweeteners make their kids act completely crazy and off the walls and stuff. So I think it's important to also kind of just pay attention to how our body feels with what we eat and how our kids' bodies feel with what we give them.
Okay, yeah. So question. I'm sure like you might be familiar with our microbiome and what that might how that might like relate to our health. Could you kind of touch a little bit based on like what that might be for people who might not know what the microbiome is, and how like those different foods can help help us? And so if you could, yeah.
I will touch on this really lightly unless there's another panelist that might know more than me, because I'm absolutely not an expert in that area, but I can explain the basic idea of the microbiome. Is there's some bacteria in our bodies that are actually good for us. We usually think of bacteria as bad things, but there's some that we need to be able to like digest our foods and do a lot of the work for our body. And when those get off balance, then it can start to make us feel more sick. So there are some foods that support the healthy biome, some that actually have probiotics right in them, like some of the healthier yogurts and cheeses might have some probiotics in them, and that's helpful, especially like after recovering from a GI illness. Like if you get a gastroenteritis, that can really wipe out a lot of the good bacteria from your gut, and those probiotics can kind of replace them a little bit and help them to start growing again.
Okay.
Somebody else saved me, because I don't feel like I did a great job with that one.
I think you said as much as I know about them as well. So thank you.
Well, no problem. We appreciate that. I know, like, I thought that to be an interesting question, because it's such a, mental wellness is such a new idea. And so there have been a couple studies that I found that kind of show that are kind of like talked about how our microbiome may impact our how what we eat impacts our microbiome, and that affects our brain development, especially like in younger kids. But it's so new, like, you know, there's so much that the normal person like myself knows. So I thought I'd give it a shot to ask that question. So I definitely appreciate that. I'll kind of shift the subject a little bit then, on just ask about like timing of our meals. So we eat, you know, our breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I think that's what the My Plate for for what most schools kind of go by is having those different meals in place, those 3 meals a day. Does when we eat our meals like kind of play a part into how healthy or how developed a child is in the long run?
I'm going to say yes on that, and one of the things I would like to emphasize especially will be breakfast. It's amazing how many times I'm taking care of a kid or I meet a family and their problem is they're having a hard time learning in school, or, they can't focus. and you find that they barely ever eat breakfast, and it's hard to function if you don't have the necessary nutrients or the energy that your brain needs to actually do its job. And you're going to school, and I always tell the kids it's like driving a car with almost no gas in it. You're not going to get very far. So it is key that we're eating regular meals to keep our blood sugar steady. The content of the meal is very important to make sure it's well balanced, because if it's a diet heavy in carbohydrates, what you get is a high of sugar and then a crash. And that is not enough to sustain energy, throughout the day. So you have to have some protein in there, some fat, and your vitamins and minerals as well.
I know Dr. Bush had mentioned on a previous question, well, it wasn't a question, but in kind of her introduction to this, was that this younger generation, our generation, we tend to stay up later on our phones, as well as just give our attention to things and not really prioritize our sleep as much. I know you mentioned the breakfast being so important to how we are able to think and be able to function throughout the day. Is there a certain point where, like, I'm thinking of more like dinner, like in the afternoon, that we shouldn't be eating? Like, as far as, like, is there anything out there that may kind of touch on if eating later in the day is like not as beneficial for us?
This is Dr. Dom from the sleep perspective. Clearly, we sleep better if we don't have a full stomach. So avoiding eating or drinking, and certainly avoiding alcohol for several hours before going to bed is a key for good quality sleep.
I agree with that. And I also like to tell my patients, like, the reason we're eating is to give us energy and drive to go. And we just don't need that at bedtime. I think a lot of the people that are eating very late at night are often not eating the healthiest foods. It's not usually a meal that people are grabbing at 10 o'clock at night. It's a bag of chips or something that's easy and quick. And usually those foods are just extra calories that we don't need at all in our day. And then they're not only affecting our sleep, they're affecting our weight and making us less healthy overall, less good heart health and everything else when we're binging those junk foods late at night.
I think on top of that, the only one thing I'd add is the intake of caffeine beyond a certain point during your day, and making sure caffeinated beverages and drinks should, be limited, especially after noon, 1 p.m.
Oh, okay. That's good
But if
to
I
know.
stop drinking caffeine when I have a headache.
Well, I'm
That was
glad
half
you
a joke. Half a joke.
I'm glad you mentioned the caffeine, though, because I'm gonna kind of move forward a little bit and talk about sleep debt and other aspects of sleep, and so, like, the restorative aspect of it. So I just got, like, for some of the parents out there who may not know the different types of sleep disorders that may be out there, I just wanted to kind of touch a little bit on that as we carry on throughout the conversations. If these are things that are brought up, you kind of have a little understanding. So there's 4 main categories of sleep disorders. There's insomnia, which is trouble falling asleep or staying asleep. There's excessive daytime sleepiness, which is just issues of staying awake, staying alert, being attentive. There's sleep rhythm problems, where people have difficulties staying on a regular sleep schedule, consistently trying to go to sleep at a certain time. They have difficulties like doing that. And then there's sleep disruptive behaviors, which are just unusual behaviors or movements that occur during sleep. And so those are just 4 main things that I just kind of wanted to educate some of our listeners to, in case those things are kind of discussed. And so we kind of already touched a little bit on this. And so I kind of want to ask this question. So what is the relationship between sleep and our mental health? Yeah, I just, I guess we can start there.
I'll start with that one, and it's a very clear relationship, and it's a two-way street. That is, if you don't sleep well, you're much more likely to have issues with depression, anxiety, lack of reserve. Also, if you have mental health issues to start with, they in themselves impact sleep, and so you can get into this vicious cycle. And sometimes it's difficult to know what came first, which is the chicken, which is the egg. And it almost doesn't matter when someone's dealing with mental health issues and sleep issues. It's really important to address both aspects of that. But clearly, people who don't sleep soundly are often suffering from issues with depression and anxiety, at least, if not other deeper mental health issues.
Awesome. So, oh, oops, I must be missing a slide. I'm sorry, that was embarrassing. But so can you touch a little bit on sleep debt and kind of share what that is?
I certainly can. So our bodies need a certain amount of sleep per night. So the American Sleep Association for teens, so for like grade school kids, would recommend 10 to 12 hours of sleep per night. For teens, high school kids, they would recommend at least 8 to 10 hours of sleep per night. I would venture to guess that a good percentage of our listeners' families and just our school population as a whole are not getting that much sleep. And if your body's not getting that sleep, they develop a sleep debt. It's not as if your brain forgets that lack of sleep. It builds up over time. And so a lot of us, certainly in the working world, we shortchange our sleep during the week, and we try and catch up on the weekends. A lot of us will sleep in longer on a Saturday morning or Sunday morning than we would on the rest of the work week. But 2 days of trying to catch up isn't enough to pay off that sleep debt, and it builds up over time, and it clearly has consequences.
I'm interested to know if you would agree with what I tell my patients. I tell them that if they count how many hours of sleep they get on the average weeknight, and then they count how many hours they get on a weekend when nobody wakes them up and they can sleep just as long as they want to. I like to tell them if that's more than a 2-hour difference, it's not okay. But that's
right.
That's too much of a debt, and you're not going to overcome that by Monday. So you're just going to keep having worse and worse problems.
Yeah, that is spot on. That's a great recommendation.
And another thing I let people know is when we've got, let's say we have somebody with sleep apnea. So they might be getting a great number of hours of sleep a night, but there's not a good quality of sleep. So usually they've had that problem for a very long time before we get it diagnosed and get it treated. So maybe a kid gets their tonsils out and now their sleep apnea is gone. We don't tend to see big differences in their moods and behavior for, Dr. Dodd, what would you say, maybe like 6 to 8 weeks after surgery before their sleep is actually caught up to the point that they're getting the benefit of a good night's sleep. So some people feel like, oh, but I slept good for 3 nights and I didn't feel any different. So it has nothing to do with my sleep. And I just like to remind people, it can take a long time to overcome that deficit that gets created.
Hi, my name's Sheila. I just have a question about the sleeping, like when I get home from work or when my child gets home from school. Is it okay to take a nap, or do you not recommend that? Or
That's a great question. So it sounds like the question was, is napping okay? And I feel, especially for kids, napping is fine as long as it doesn't affect the quality of their nighttime sleep. That is, if they come home from school, take a long nap, and then have trouble falling asleep at night, that's a problem. On the other hand, if they take a short nap, 20-30 minute nap to kind of recover after school, get going on their activities, schoolwork, and then fall asleep at night, I don't have any problem with that.
okay, thank you.
So, you mentioned quality of sleep. So, what kind of defines that quality of sleep? I know some people, they think that I can sleep for 10 hours and not be woken up by my alarm. Would that be considered quality sleep?
Yeah. So yeah, good quality sleep means that you're falling asleep in a reasonable time. For most kids, they're falling asleep in under 20 minutes. That there's infrequent arousals during the night. Ideally, they're waking up either spontaneously or before their alarm. And when they wake up, they feel rested. You may feel a little grogginess as you first wake up but by the time you wash your face and are dressed for the day, you should feel good and ready to go. That really defines good quality sleep.
I would say that for most people, except the really younger kids, if they were getting really honestly getting 10 hours every single night and they were still having daytime sleepiness, I think that's something worth talking to their doctor about to make sure that they're not having an apnea problem or another type of sleep disturbance in the night that could be affecting that quality. You can't
Absolutely.
just tell people have a good quality.
Okay, yeah. So working at Grahi, we've kind of collected some data, and we realize there's a lot of different health disparities in communities where people of color reside. And one of those disparities is that we live in what tends to be high stress environments, and that can be due to many different aspects. And so just wondering if you all have some suggestions that people could try to like use to implement into their own lives or sleep habits so they can try to experience a more optimal and more optimal sleeping, a higher quality of sleeping.
Um, Yeah, you bring up a really good point, and it clearly makes a difference, especially if you're living in a very urban environment where there's a lot of noise, extraneous light. That there's no doubt that that has an adverse impact on sleep quality, and anything you can do to block that out is a benefit. So, if light is an issue, having light blocking shades is important. If you can't do that, at least having eye shades can make a difference. um, and if there's a lot of sirens or extraneous noise, if you need earplugs, that can make a difference. I feel that noise machine, if it has ocean sounds or rain or something that can drown out extraneous noise, that can be beneficial. The other important thing is so many people now have screens in their bedroom, TV or their iPad or their phone. I I can't tell you how damaging that is to good quality sleep. And it's not just the stimulation, the light itself uh, takes away from good quality sleep. So there's things in the environment that you bring up, and then there's things that we introduce into our own environment that have an impact.
Yeah. So yeah, you kind of touched did somebody have a question? I'm sorry. I heard a mic. No. Okay. You kind of brought up sleep aids. So what about things like melatonin? Is that something that should be introduced into like a youth? Is that something okay for parents to try to look into?
So I'm not a huge fan for using sleep aids, especially in young kids, unless you've exhausted all the behavioral things. I would say, you touched on some of the main sleep abnormalities, the categories that we see. And I would say in grade school kids, the main issues are limit setting issues where, kids are great manipulators. They, they can delay bedtime amazingly well. And it's up to the caregivers to set limits and to be firm on bedtimes, lights out, TVs off, no keeping phones out of the bedroom. And if the right environment and you set the right um, uh, limits, kids, as a general rule, they're good sleepers. I think it's an exception where they would ever need a sleep aid to improve sleep quality.
I have a question about that because this is for myself. Um, Last week, like I went to the health food store and I picked up some sleep called bedtime. Tea called bedtime tea, and I haven't used it yet, but I don't. Would you recommend something like that?
I, I don't know exactly what's in that, but as a general rule, sleepy time tea basically has, chamomile and, and I really have no trouble with that at all. And in fact, in adults, I don't even really have a problem with low doses of melatonin, kind of 1 to 5 milligrams and it can be a help. Uh, and I'm just saying that in children, I think I would avoid any over-the-counter pills or if you can. But I think for a sleepy time tea, I wouldn't be concerned about that at all.
Thank you.
In addition to what's been said, I think I agree with the fact that we want to avoid using the sleep aids. But then in my population of patients, the kids I see are kids who have epilepsy and who seizures are uncontrolled, and poor sleep may be playing a role, or they have migraines and headaches every day. And when it's in a way affecting their medical issues as well, or their performance in school, there are times when, so it's not an all or none rule. There are times when melatonin use is actually needed to help regulate sleep. It's not a long-term thing, but I want to get that kid on a schedule, a regular bedtime, a regular wake-up time. And sometimes you may need something like melatonin to jumpstart the sleep schedule. And once they get into a pattern, they can maintain it on their own.
Another thing about melatonin that's interesting is blue lights have been shown to decrease the level of natural melatonin that we release. And that's part of the reason that those screens can have such a bad effect on us. There was a study once that looked at, this was adults, but it was a reading before bedtime study, and half of the group read on a Kindle and half read on paper. They read the same story, so there was no difference in the excitement level. And the group that read in a paper book got to sleep, I think it was like an hour. It's been a while since I read the study, so I don't remember exactly how long, but I think it was like an hour difference in the amount of time it took them to fall asleep after reading. So really strongly recommend reading at bedtime. I think it's a great calming activity for the brain to help people calm down, and it's good for learning as well. But if you're going to do that, I definitely recommend making sure they're reading a paper book, not an electronic book.
So those are really great answers. I'm gonna kind of switch up the question a little bit. As far as like sleep, how, so let's say we have a child who might sleepwalk or snores or sleep talks, even have night terrors. How would you all suggest we suggest like approaching those type of things?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's a broad question, and some of these things are normal. So for like sleep terrors in a young child are normal. Some sleepwalking or sleep talking in a young child can be normal. I would say the majority of children are growing out of that by second half of grade school, certainly by high school. If there are persistent sleep issues, the same thing would go for bedwetting. It's going to be normal, certainly up to age, 6 to 8, it's if it's going to be beyond that, or if they stop bedwetting and then they start bedwetting again, that's when you say, all right, this needs further evaluation. In terms of snoring, some snoring is not unusual, but if someone's snoring and is having trouble gaining weight, or is gaining too much weight, or is having trouble in school, or there's concerns about maybe hyperactivity, those are the kids with snoring that we say, let's make sure it's not just that, it's not more than snoring, that they don't have sleep apnea on top of that.
In addition to that, for monitoring for sleep apnea, I'd watch for kids who are stopping. You hear them snore, 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 and then it's quiet and there's no breathing for a while, more than a few seconds, long enough to feel a little uncomfortable. And then they make this big snort and then start to snore again. That would be another sign of sleep apnea. that I would probably evaluate a little quicker, even if they weren't having a lot of behavior issues. But I agree that if my patients are just constant little motors of snoring and they're doing fine and they're not sleepy the next day and they're not having any behavior or learning problems, I don't send that for further evaluation.
So another question. So you mentioned like the sleep behaviors, which is something that I feel like can be a little bit more noticeable, can be like noticeable in certain kids. What about something that might not be as noticeable, which is like I'm referring to like memory. How does sleep kind of impact your memory?
Oh yeah, it's a huge part of it. We don't know exactly what happens during sleep. There's a lot of neurologic physiology going on, but it's strongly felt that sleep is so important in consolidating memories. And so what you absorb during the day tends to be ingrained at night. And it helps you connect those new facts and the new things you've learned with things you learned before. So yeah, good quality sleep is so inherent in good school performance and good mental functioning, including memory.
So for like a parent who's preparing their child to, you know, attend um, higher learning, would you suggest they try to teach their kids to not stay up late studying? You know, because that could actually be more detrimental to them retaining that information.
It can be so hard to answer. I mean, I doubt any of the three of us didn't stay up late studying sometimes when we were in medical school, right? So we'd be kind of hypocritical if you're like, no, always quit. I think taking breaks and trying to work on planning your schedule well enough, you know, when the big tests are coming and you start studying a few days ahead. My own daughter was up until midnight last night for a bio test today. She's the only one that did well on that test. So last night I was like, really, you have to stop and go to bed. But today it paid off for her. So it's really hard to find that perfect balance.
Yeah, I think you know the all night cramming, that's clearly has to be the exception. If that's every night, it's not going to work out for that person. Yeah, in the long run, as a general rule, you want to get that good quality sleep. And again, if there's a big test coming up or these exceptions where you got behind because you had sports as well, okay, but if that's more than 1 or 2 nights a week, I think it's going to catch up with you.
I think that's a good balance point to kind of put a line on not letting it happen too much. And I agree, kids today, especially the kids that are really the high achievers that want higher education, they are really pressured to take a lot of very hard classes, and you have to have an extracurricular, and their schedules are pretty packed. So sometimes it is, even if they are good planners, sometimes it can be hard to find the time to do everything that we expect teenagers to do nowadays. So
yeah,
I can kind of touch on that a little bit myself, being that I was recently a student and I worked and I tried to maintain a healthy work-life balance and going to the gym and all the things that you take on with life, going grocery shopping and things like that. And I often found myself not having time because I was like, I have bills I gotta pay. I'm in school, I'm trying to pay my bills, and so I would work a lot and I would stay up really late to 2 a.m. trying to get my studies in, and I ended up having like optical migraines and things like that, and found myself having trouble with my sight and my memory. So that's why I kind of bring up that question, because I feel like things like that, like sleep, when you have like a lot of pressures, we want to see our kids do really well. And I feel like oftentimes we forget to let them know, hey, it's okay to like learn how to pace yourself and to look at your schedule and see how you can kind of maneuver things rather than overstrain yourself. I feel like a lot of kids, especially as they transition into college, try to overstrain themselves. And so I thank you all for kind of touching on that.
One thing that we didn't touch on, but can impact length of sleep and quality sleep is school start times. And if high school kids, I don't know how much flexibility they have on their start time, but if they can start a little bit later, no earlier than 8 a.m., we know that those kids do better. Not only that, there's less risk of accident as they get to school if they're driving their own vehicle. And certainly if once kids are in college, they may want to avoid those 8 a.m. classes because you touched on this where schedules and circadian rhythms can impact sleep. And as a general rule, teenagers have this delayed circadian rhythm where they want to go to bed later, they want to sleep later. And if you try and fight that by you have trouble falling asleep at night, but then you have an 8 a.m. class, you can really end up shortchanging your sleep.
For those who don't know, could you just explain what circadian rhythms are by chance?
Right, that's a great, I'm sorry. So every one of us in our brain has an internal clock, and it's set to just over 24 hours. And every day it's reset by the sun. And so we kind of have this schedule, and it affects our hormones, it affects our metabolism, it affects our sleep, it affects so many aspects of our health. And as you guys probably know, like the elderly, they're to bed early and then they wake up early. That's why they go to the early bird special for dinner. Whereas teenagers, they're the night owls. They're the ones, they don't want to go to bed before midnight, and then they want to sleep until 10 a.m. And those are natural and normal shifts in the circadian rhythm over the span of our lives. But it's important to recognize those patterns and kind of adapt to them.
Right. Well, that was great. That was all my questions, to be honest. And so if I would like to open up the floor to anyone who may have questions out there, any parents or any viewers, really.
There's no questions. I can mention one other tip I like to give people for good sleep is to make sure that your environment doesn't change very much in the middle of the night. Some people ask, like, is it okay for my kids to listen to music, like calming classical music when they fall asleep? I always say, as long as that music's going to stay steady all night long, that's probably okay. But we have a natural defense mechanism that if something changes while we're sleeping, we need to wake up and figure out what's going on. Why did something change? Is the house on fire? Is there a burglar? Is a bear breaking into the hut? What's going on that's different than when I went to sleep? So making sure that whatever is happening when you're sleeping, that stays nice and consistent through the night. Same thing with sleep training babies. If they're falling asleep in your arms and then you're putting them in the crib and sneaking away, as soon as they get to that point in their sleep pattern where they're almost awake, they're going to sense that something's different, something's not right. They wake up scared. Where did mom go? What's happening? Why am I all alone now? But if we can teach them to calm themselves and fall asleep on their own in the first place, then it's not scary to wake up alone in the middle of the night, and they can get a better through the night, sleeping a little bit quicker.
It looks like we do have one question in the chat here. It says, when should you seek help for your child regarding sleep?
Yeah, I would say if you perceive that there's a sleep issue and you've tried all the behavioral things and the limit settings, and you're still not getting anywhere, and that you feel that adverse sleep is affecting either that child's health, their performance in school, or the parent's relationship with the child, I'd get it checked out. I'd talk to your healthcare provider about it.
Looks like there's another question. I can read it. Why is it important to have children learn to fall asleep on their own? And thank you. So yeah, why is it important for children to learn how to sleep on their own?
Yeah, it's such an important skill, and I think the earlier they learn that, the easier it is through their lifetimes. and it's just, again, otherwise, if that kids, again, like I said, they're great manipulators. So, they keep coming out, they're like, I need another glass of water, or I need another book, or, can you tell me another story? And it just starts to chip into their time in asleep and their quality of their sleep. And if they, inevitably kids will wake up in the middle of the night, and if they need, all these situations for them to fall back asleep, that disrupts not only their sleep but the parents' sleep as well. And again, if anyone in the family is sleep deprived, it affects the whole family.
Mhm. So I guess I'll ask a question, kind of piggybacking off of that. So is there a particular age where a parent should look towards, moving away from that? I know like some younger kids, I have a younger nephew who would often ask for me to come sleep and to sleep with them. And so curious, is there a particular age where we should really just draw a line and say, hey?
Yeah, like, again, I hate this. The sooner the better. And again, kids under the age of even one can learn how to fall asleep on their own. And again, it's consistency makes all the difference with kids. If they sense that there's a room to negotiate, oh, they're gonna push the envelope on it. And again, you want to have a better bedtime routine. That's what tells that kid, all right, we're transitioning from daytime activities to bed. So you need that routine, but you want it to be a healthy routine that is not screens. You like Dr. Bush pointed out, reading to the kid is a great one, or letting them read on their own. And then a firm bedtime and say, okay, that's, you're on your own, you're good here.
I think there's another issue too, not just good quality sleep and forming good habits for life, but the younger we get, the more we have to worry about things like SIDS too. So co-sleeping, unless it's done in an incredibly carefully way, which most people don't do it that way, but having a baby sleep with a sleeping adult is a big risk for sudden death and suffocation. So I think really an adult shouldn't sleep with a baby ever, unless it's in a special co-sleeper firm surface walled off area, which at that point it's not much different than having a crib next to your bed. So I'm not sure what benefit people are getting by having that device. But a very newborn sleeping in your arms is good for bonding. It's good for the baby. That's fine. But I would tell people by 2 or 3 months, you should be working on getting that baby to sleep without you getting it all the way to sleep. The longer we do any habit, the harder it is to break. So the longer you go past that mark, the harder it's going to be to get the baby to sleep on its own.
I kind of have a question only because I'm not sure about this. But say like the kids have to be to school like at 8:30 in the morning. What's the earliest should they be up? Should we wake
Yeah,
them up from their sleep?
there's so many factors that go into that, in terms of, how much prep time they need. And but the bottom line is, yeah, you want to let them, their best quality sleep is probably those last few hours before they get up. And you want them to be able to, as much preparation as they can do the night before, whether it's getting their lunch ready, their books together, whatever they need, they want it so they can just get ready, grab it and go, and not have to spend a lot of time getting ready for the day in the morning, because you want them to sleep until that last moment they possibly can.
With time for breakfast.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if you mentioned this, but with that time, that preparation time, that's like with the inclusion of 8 hours of rest. Did you mention that by chance? Is that a whole 8 hours, or is that, or am I?
Yeah, for like a teenager, for a high school kid, that 8 hours is certainly a goal. Again, I would venture to guess that a lot of our kids are not getting that much, but that's a goal of 8 hours of sleep. So again, to do that means you have to be prepared and have stuff ready even before that.
I don't like sticking with a very strict 8-hour rule because I feel like everybody's a little bit different. So 8 isn't enough for some people. They might need 9 or 10. You kind of have to monitor your own body and what do you need to feel well during the day, to feel alert and be able to be active and not groggy and be able to learn and listen. So I think sometimes we all get really hung up on that 8-hour number, but some people need more than that. Like was mentioned earlier, some older people need much less than that. Good to monitor yourself and try to figure out what's the right amount for you to feel good.
Do you all know where that 8-hour number came from by chance?
I think it's based on population studies and if people are allowed to sleep freely, no alarm clocks, what's their natural inclination to sleep? And for kids, it's it's much like grade school kids, it's even longer than that, 10 to 12 hours. Teenagers, it's more 8 to 10. Adults, it tends to be more 7 to 9. So I think that's where that comes from. But nowadays it's so rare that very few people have that luxury of sleeping until they just naturally wake up.
Okay. Any other questions out there by chance? As we look towards wrapping up this great conversation. No. All right. Well,
I just wanted to say thank you so much to our clinicians on the call. You all are all like so wonderful every time that I see you, but this session was especially informative for me personally. So I just want to say thank you so much.
You're welcome, Katie.
Yeah, I would like to say thank you too. So I did get some questions answered and some wonderings answered. So I do appreciate the session. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sheila.
These are such important topics, and I appreciate you guys putting it together and bringing up these issues because they have such an important impact on kids' health and well-being and future success.
Yeah, thank you. All right.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks, everybody, and thanks to all of everyone who joined the call. We're glad that you were able to join and hear about these important topics.
You all have a great night.
Thanks, everyone.